This is Mile High Sports.
Mile high expectations for this Denver Broncos team here ahead of the 2022 NFL season. Welcome into the Broncos Blitz, a daily show here, Mile High Sports, hosted by myself, Cody Roark, and Zach Segars to my right. We both cover the Denver Broncos for MHS. And I tell you what, Zach, I'm very excited to launch this show to give Broncos country another outlet, another voice of people who are going to be at practice every day. They're going to be at games. It's going to be really fun, my man. Very excited to do this with you.
Absolutely. Same here. And it's finally going to be fun Broncos football. I've been working here for a few years, and it's been tough sledding the past few seasons. So excited to finally watch quality, fun Broncos football.
Well, let's break it all down right here because we just mentioned it. Russell Wilson is now the quarterback here for this Denver Broncos franchise. And I think one of the biggest things that not a lot of people are talking about, you see Seahawks fans, they're talking about Russ like, oh, yeah, we're so glad we let him go. I feel like that tune will change a little bit throughout the season because Seattle has their own holes. Russ wanted out. Russ didn't want to be in Seattle anymore, and he wanted to come to a franchise he said gives him the best opportunity to win, even alluding to the fact that he's looking to play another 10 years in the NFL. I mean, in your opinion, Zach, what does this mean for the Broncos? Because Denver for the last 7 years has been without a quarterback of this magnitude.
Yeah, I mean, it means everything. And I think the Seahawks fans haven't been wandering through the desert for 7 years yet. So let's follow back on them then. And then I think we'll see a little more sweating, a little more anguish like Broncos fans were experiencing. So it means everything. Football is about the quarterback position at the end of the day. And there's the haves and the have-nots, and the Broncos have been in the have-not column for a long time, and now they have one. You need lightning to strike and a million coincidences to occur if you're going to try and win a Super Bowl or compete without a quarterback. The Broncos got phenomenally lucky in 2015, and it's not replicable. This is what they need to compete, especially in this division with the high-flying quarterbacks.
Well, and I think that's another thing, too. A lot of people get in the conversation about the AFC West. Oh, well, you know what? They're still Patrick Mahomes. They're still Derek Carr. They're still, when you look at Justin Herbert's rising status in the NFL as a rising superstar, he's very talented, by the way. What he's done in his first two seasons, not a lot of quarterbacks have ever done. I mean, he's ahead of many people in terms of passing yards through the first two seasons, passing touchdowns. He's legit, and they've got him on his rookie deal right now, and they've got a pretty good team around him. So the West will be tough. But that's where the Broncos have to start. I think everybody's expectations coming into this season, okay, Denver Broncos, Super Bowl or bust. You know how hard that is to have a Super Bowl expectation right away when you're in not only just a division, but a conference. That's Buffalo. You have Cincinnati. Baltimore's going to be very good this season. You have Indianapolis, who's loaded up a little bit. Tennessee, who's still in the conversation. Pick your poison here. The AFC is going to be an absolute gauntlet this year. And I think Russell Wilson gives the Broncos the best chance to navigate that.
Yeah, I fully agree. He absolutely gives them a chance, a puncher's chance in what's going to be a wide open and really competitive and nasty AFC playoff picture this year. I do think there is an element, though, of you got to do it this year because of Russell Wilson's contract situation. You've got him on the cheap this year. Go for it. Now, to your point, it's very difficult. The Broncos can have a successful season, a successful 2022 campaign where they show a lot of growth and they don't win the Super Bowl. I think a playoff run would be a welcome season for all of us in Broncos country. But I do think there is an element of, hey, let's do it right now because this roster is loaded. You've got great young players, and I don't know, why not?
Well, that leads us right into our talking point of today's episode of Broncos Blitz here at Mile High Sports, and that is really going to be focused on training camp because this week, Broncos country gets to sit on the berm in Dove Valley on Wednesday. Practice begins. Players do report on Tuesday for the inaugural, getting in the process, getting all their equipment checked out, and then going through team meetings. So they'll report tomorrow with the Broncos rookies. We also have the media barbecue tomorrow that we get to attend. So that's going to be very fun seeing other media members. I imagine Nathaniel Hackett will talk with the media. George Payton will talk with the media. So I think for us now, let's focus on, we've talked about Russell Wilson in the offense. Let's focus on some of the offensive positions here that we're really focused in on training camp. Zach, I'll let you start things off here. What is one position on the offensive side of the ball that you're watching up close and personal when we're at practice this week, when training camp kicks off?
Yeah, I think one that I'm really curious to see is the center position. What is happening there? I think Lloyd Cushenberry, as of now, appears to be the front runner. You see him down at Russell Wilson's compound, working with him in San Diego. Of course, was the established starter last year, but Graham Glasgow's got to be in that picture too. You figure? I don't think we'll see Quinn Miners getting any work in there, but that is one of the, I think, maybe the only big starting mystery on this team. I feel like I guess no, there's some at tackle and at guard too. But one of the biggest mysteries on this starting offense is what is that? Who's going to be playing center, and what do they look like? And so I think that's the number one thing I have my eyes primed on.
I think that's a very fair point too, especially about Cushenberry. Like his first couple seasons in the NFL have not been what he has expected. I think he's been very open and very self-accountable about how things have gone. His rookie season, he looked like a rookie. He struggled, I think, adapting with the speed of defensive linemen, blitzing linebackers. Often at times, teams would place a defensive tackle in a zero technique, which is usually head up on the center. They would slant across his face, which forces him to have to step down. And then they blitz a linebacker right into that A gap. And sometimes that's where the delayed communication was between he and Dalton Reisner. But that brings me to my point here on the offensive line. One position I'm looking at that left guard position here, Zach, because for the Broncos, Dalton Reisner has been that guy. And I think in 2019, his rookie season, in an offense that's very similar to what we see or what we're going to see this year, we saw him have a really good season as a rookie. It gave a lot of promise. But then after transitioning to the Pat Shurmur offense, which, usually doesn't equate to much, he started to drop off a little bit. And we, at first, that Lloyd Cushenberry's rookie season, we were thinking, okay, and maybe it's because he's helping to overcompensate due to having to help out Lloyd Cushenberry inside the A gap on his right side. Well, last year, we also saw some of those same inconsistencies in pass protection, communication, chip blocking. He's got some competition now with Netane Muti, who's coming over. And look, Mike Munchak, Chris Cooper are entirely gone for this Broncos coaching staff. It is Butch Berry and Ben Steele that are now taking over. All eyes are on Dalton Reisner right now because Netane Muti could come in and could unseat him, in my opinion, because there is no allegiance with this current coaching staff. The best players are going to win, and Netane Muti has some areas in his game, like in pass protection, I think he can polish up. But in the run game, Netane Muti, I think, better suits what the Broncos want to do. Dalton Reisner is going to have his work cut out for him.
Yeah, no, I fully agree. I think that's a great one to highlight because you've got those two duking it out. And Dalton Reisner, as much as he struggled the last 2 years, you're finally going back to a scheme that's more similar to what we saw him be so successful with his rookie year. I think there's a third candidate, though, and it's actually my pick, I think, maybe to win that job, and that's Billy Turner. He might end up being that starting right tackle, and maybe he's the favorite for the right tackle job. But I think if Calvin Anderson, and this will be my second one, right tackle, if Calvin Anderson can win that right tackle job, I think it sets up a domino effect kind of down the Broncos offensive line that solves a lot of these questions. If Calvin Anderson wins that right tackle job, Billy Turner is starting somewhere on this offensive line, and that's probably going to be left guard. If he's starting at left guard, it removes, Dalton Reisner from the conversation. What happens there? It removes Graham Glasgow from that left guard conversation. And maybe makes things at center a little more clear for the Broncos with maybe Glasgow being that center. So that's another one. I think those three spots on the offensive line are the ones to really key in on with that unit, because I think it's just ripple effects across the offense.
I'm glad that you brought up Billy Turner there too, because the anticipation, at least heading into campus, he may start off on the PUP list, physically unable to perform list. But I've seen him train so far this offseason. Like when the Broncos are going through OTAs, I mean, he's putting in work at 6-0 Academy with Matt McChesney. Now, does that translate to him being ready to put on the football pads and being able to go out there and do a little more? Probably not. I know that they were following his rehab plan that was set forth by his doctor, but absolutely. I mean, Billy Turner is a complete wild card at the left guard position. He's proven over his NFL career he can play right tackle, he can play right guard, he can play left guard, he can play left tackle if you need to be. But here's where the thing comes in, and I'm glad you mentioned it. The Broncos have to find a way, and I think this year they need to answer. You can't just keep going on one-year contracts for a right tackle. You need to find a solidified presence, because you have Garrett Bowles solidified at the left tackle position. Now's the time you find a guy and you stick with that guy at right tackle. I think that's going to be huge. We also go back to center as well. Luke Wattenberg was also drafted, and he's kind of an interesting player. I don't expect him to make waves right away, but then again, part of me wonders, he's a little bit older than most of your typical NFL rookie coming into the NFL, at least, because for him, he played at Washington. He was there for almost 6 years at Washington, contributing there on that offense there. So for him, I think he's probably a little bit more NFL ready, but is he ready to transition there? And there's also another guy we haven't been talking about as a depth option, Quinn Bailey. Quinn Bailey is a guy who's been on this roster since 2019. And even though he's been a practice squad guy, he's also been called up to the active roster, and he's been putting in work as well. I got to see him last week up close and in person. Like I said, Quinn Bailey might be a little nice depth piece to have there, especially on the offensive line.
Yeah, fully agree on Quinn Bailey. He gets called up and does a good job against Joey Bosa. I mean, what more can you ask of a guy? So I think that's really impressive. But that tackle room is crowded because you've got Tom Compton now, who of course they just signed, has some guard tackle versatility that might make him more appealing to Bailey. And of course, he has the relationship with Butch Berry already. So it's a good problem to have. I don't think many people are like, man, we have too many rosterable tackles. It's a great problem to have, but it is gonna make for an interesting camp battle to watch.
Well, and I also think too, the offensive line, a lot of Broncos fans too that I've interacted with have said, oh, the Broncos didn't really address the offensive line. I look at Denver's O-line, they have 13 plus players there, and I feel like they have really good quality backups. And you also go to the point too, we talked about Dalton Risner. If Billy Turner were to slide over to left guard, I mean, I don't think that Dalton Risner would be on the roster at that point. I feel like maybe some team out there, and once we get into training camp this week, we see this happen all the time. Players get hurt. And if there's another team out there that, say, loses a left guard, that makes Dalton Risner trade candidate number one for most of those teams if they do suffer something like that. And hopefully, like I said, we're not sitting here hoping guys get injured. That's not the case. There's media members that do stuff like that, and there's fans that think like that. But here's the deal. Dalton Risner, I think, has given so much to Denver. And obviously, the local guy, it's a great story. But, now you have a brand new coaching staff that hasn't been here, that has no allegiance to you. And really, Nathaniel Hackett has said it from day one. We want to put the best 11 football players out there. So I think for Dalton Risner, this is where that pressure is going to come in a little bit. But I'm confident with the Broncos' depth at offensive line. Do you agree with me? Do you disagree?
Fully agree. I think there's questions to have with the top end spots, and we just kind of went over some of them. But I don't have those concerns with the depth. I think the Broncos' depth on the offensive line could stack up with most NFL teams, if not all NFL teams. I think they have a good number of bodies that can fill in terms of
could be like
injury.
Chicago.
Yeah, they need to get better on the maybe in terms of the starters, but I really agree with you there. And I think the Dalton Risner point's great too, because he is in a high pressure situation this year. The excuse has long been for Dalton Risner. They moved to this Pat Shurmur system. It doesn't fit him as well. And that's why these past 2 years have been so rough. That excuse doesn't fly anymore. So if he can't put it together this year, man, I think it's got to be Netani Muti instead of him, whether that be as a starter or as the number one backup to Turner.
I think that's a fair point to make as well. Now, I want to transition to another position on the offensive side of the ball. Let's talk about tight end. Greg Dolcich was a draft addition for them. There's a lot of excitement around the hair and what he's got, but also just as an athlete, like he's versatile, 17.6 yards per reception in his career at UCLA, coming from a pro style of offense. A lot of Broncos fans are wondering, well, is he going to be able to block? The Broncos, in my opinion, they did not draft a guy like Greg Dolcich to be a blocking tight end. They added him because he offers a versatile skill set. Many people have compared to Travis Kelce. And look, Travis Kelce is a one-of-a-kind tight end. Best in the NFL. You can make the argument between he, Darren Waller, and some others. But play style-wise, he's the type of guy, when you watch film on Dolcich, the way that he gets open, he's frustrating. Like, I'm a defensive guy, Zach. I love defensive football. I'm a former defensive coordinator. So for me, like, scheming against a guy like Dolcich, I would be scratching my head saying, how the heck is this guy always wide open? And he's not a world beater in terms of speed, but he has deceptively fast play speed, which is different than 40-yard straight line speed. That is where I think the value is here with Greg Dolcich, but he's going to be competing with Albert Okwuegbunam here for that tight end one job for the Broncos this season. What are your thoughts on that position battle as it stands right now for this Broncos football team?
Yeah, I think they drafted Greg Dolcich for a reason. And something that really stood out to me was, in that Behind the Broncos show that I'm sure so many of us watched, you had Hackett like kind of right there with Peyton, pretty much tugging on his jacket going, oh man, now we have something we didn't have before. And that really did stand out to me, because I think surface level, you could say Okwuegbunam and Dolcich are very similar stylistically. And I do think they have a lot of similarities, but you did hit on some of the differences there. And I think, some of that movement, some of that versatility stands out with Dolcich. Is he a great blocker? I think it depends on the role, honestly. Is he a good blocker for an inline tight end? No. And based on his size, I don't know if that's something he'll develop. He's got the grit for it. He works hard when he's given those roles. But I'm really excited to see him play in the slot occasionally, which I think is becoming more and more in vogue. We're seeing bigger players in the slot to help that run game. On first and second down, if you can stay in 11 personnel or 12 personnel kind of, but play it like 11 and put Dolcich out there in the slot. And for a slot receiver, he's a fantastic blocker. So I think to your point on versatility, you can do a lot of fun things there. Now, as for the competition, I think it's going to be Okwuegbunam this first year, just because it is so hard to transition to the NFL game as a tight end. Even though he's not going to be the biggest blocker, he still has to learn how to block at the NFL level and be a pass catcher at the NFL level. It's so difficult to do. So while I do think he'll have a valuable role on this team, even in year one, I think it's going to be O starting and then Dolcich as a really valuable utility piece because of how versatile he is.
And that's not a bad thing either.
No, not at all.
And I think sometimes people are like, oh, they drafted him so high. How come he isn't starting? That's where you start to see some of the narratives come in like, oh, well, maybe he's a bust. Like, we have to avoid that. Okay, look, if Greg Dulcich drops his first pass, he's not a bust. And I think that's something that we saw, especially remember Noah Fant, his rookie season, he had 1 or 2 drops in the game. He had that fumble against the Green Bay Packers his rookie season. And everyone's like, oh my gosh, this guy is a bust. Players have to get acclimated to the game. It's a process. And look, sometimes you have the anomaly of a player. And I think like for the most recent example for the Broncos, Patrick Surtain was the example of a guy who was drafted with high stature that it met and exceeded expectations as a first-round draft pick. Dolcich isn't a first-round draft pick. Now, a lot of people were making the argument he could be the top tight end. We know that Trey McBride went before him, and there were some other guys too, like Jelani Woods that went before him. In my opinion, though, Greg Dulcich, I think, is in a good role to learn, and you can play both of these guys at the same time. You're not just limited, okay, Alberto is starting, like you mentioned. You could go to 12 personnel. You could even go to 13 personnel, which leads us to another part of the tight end room, and that is who's going to be that third tight end? Is it going to be Eric Tomlinson, who was brought over in free agency as more of a blocking tight end, not necessarily a pass-catching option. You have Andrew Beck on the roster, still slated as that fullback guy, but then you brought back Eric Saubert, who looks really good so far this offseason. They've added him a little bit later than I expected, but he was a key guy for them on special teams. To me, I just have a hard time seeing Tomlinson being the free agent signing that he was, coming in and uprooting Eric Saubert, who's already been on this team and looks good as a guy who can contribute as a blocker and as a pass catcher. He offers the Broncos some value there.
Yeah, it's tough to figure out how the pieces are going to fit together because ultimately, I kind of agree with you. I think you need that guy who can be a receiving threat and a blocking threat. You put Tomlinson on the field right now, you know what Tomlinson's doing. We're talking about a guy that I believe has something like 2 receptions for 8 yards over the past 3 seasons. He is not a pass catching threat. He's a very good blocker. He's a glorified tackle. And I think maybe the Broncos need that. They signed him knowing make no mistake about what Eric Tomlinson is. It's very clear what he can do and what his limitations are. And the Broncos made a point to sign him in free agency, which makes me think, man, maybe he does stick around, but I do think Saubert fits better with the talent they have because Okwuegbunam and Dolcich, I think they can improve as blockers, but right now that is not their strength. They're not all around guys. They're receiving targets first. Saubert's kind of more that do-it-all guy. Beck can be kind of that do-it-all guy, but Tomlinson's just a blocking only guy. I think you need some of those, again, versatility, more versatile pieces to balance out that tight end room.
Part of me is wondering, do the Broncos keep on a guy like Tomlinson as a backup tight end, or do they give him like a fullback designation kind of as well? Because I imagine in a situation, especially in this West Coast style of offense, outside zone scheme, which involves really for the offense, stepping downfield one way, coming back the other side. In the goal line, I think Eric Tomlinson would be a great additional body to throw in on the jumbo package on the offensive line. When you're on the 4-yard line or the 1-yard line and you have workhorses behind you like Javonte Williams and Melvin Gordon, the Broncos red zone offense could see a significant boost this season with better blocking and in the scheme, which I feel like translates really well to the players. There is that though, right? So now we just talked about running back here. I mean, a lot of people are saying, okay, Javonte Williams, premier back. Rightfully so. I think Javonte will be the premier name. However, I just don't see much of a change up in how they are used this season. Fantasy football players out there are angry that Melvin Gordon re-signed with the Denver Broncos because they're like, oh, they're taking touches away from Javonte Williams. Last year, 213 rushing attempts apiece. I honestly feel like they're not going to change much. It's not broken. I mean, last year, Javonte averaged 4.4 yards per carry and had over 1,000 all-purpose yards. Melvin Gordon had over 1,000 all-purpose yards and 4.5 yards per carry. These two guys are a dynamic tandem at the tailback position. Why break it up?
Okay, I'm gonna be the hater here.
Right,
you're teeing me up because of Melvin Gordon's age, and I think we have to see it first. Now, if Melvin Gordon looks exactly like he did last year, I'm with you. It ain't broke, don't fix it. Maybe favor Williams a little bit just because I think he'll continue to blossom and grow and become an even more special back and one of the truly elite backs in the NFL, because he can impact the game as a receiver, pass protector, runner, and he's good at all of it. But ultimately, I don't believe Melvin Gordon's going to look like that same guy. He's hit that 1,500 touches mark that we often see being the cliff for running backs. So we know the cliff's around this area. And another indicator of that, if you look at the NFL's 33 most productive running backs last year, which of course Melvin Gordon was one of, he's the oldest. And I think that just shows, look at all the productive guys. They all tend to be a good bit younger than Melvin Gordon. So the cliff is approaching. Now, maybe it doesn't happen this year, but man, when it happens at the running back position, it happens fast. And so I think at this stage in his career, if you want to get the best version of Melvin Gordon, and I think Melvin Gordon can still be a very impactful, valuable piece of this offense, spell him a little bit, maybe instead of, I know it's 203 carries. I don't know total touches, but maybe instead of 250 touches on the season, you give him 125 and you maintain getting that elite version of Melvin Gordon. It is a big cut, or maybe 175, but, I don't know. I think give more to Javonte Williams. You're talking about an elite weapon. Give it, I really think Javonte Williams is a special running back. And I don't think Melvin Gordon is quite that player anymore. Feed your monster of a running back. And you have Mike Boone in there too, who I think he should get some touches. He's a nice player. He can keep everyone fresh. So I don't think I'd quite keep the split 50-50 unless we really see Melvin Gordon maintain what he was doing last year.
I'll play devil's advocate here in terms of age, 29 years old, right? Like, I hope, like, especially like one day, because I know as media members, we all get into this. And yes, I think when you look at a physical contact sport that is the NFL, you do have to factor in age. I mean, we saw Derrick Henry, I think for the first time in his career, we saw him kind of get run down a little bit last season in Tennessee. However, I do think at 29 years of age, I think Melvin Gordon is in a prime position to thrive a little bit more because of the fact that it will be a by committee approach. You're not asking Melvin Gordon to run the ball 24, 25 times a game. You don't want Javonte to run 24 to 25 times a game. In my opinion, okay, this would be ideal. If let's say the Broncos are going to use three backs, and you mentioned Mike Boone, Javonte, Melvin, I feel like 18 carries a piece per game. And then you give a guy like Mike Boone, maybe 2 or 3, see what you could do with those touches. But it also begs the question too, and this will kind of round out the close of our show here. It kind of presents a question hanging in tomorrow as we look at defense, but also for this team, it's like you look at all the wide receivers that Denver does have and all the weapons that Russell Wilson has in his back pocket. I mean, Zach, the question I want to ask here is, will that impact the run game? Like, will Denver be a more pass-heavy team, or will they be a more run-heavy team, or will it be a 50-50 balance? To me, that's the big question. Your final thoughts here on today's show.
Yeah, I think we're going to get good old-fashioned like football basics. The run is going to set up the pass, and everything's going to work off of that. And I think that's when we've seen Russell Wilson at his best. I think what you want to see is kind of like a souped up version of the 2017 Jaguars offense that Hackett coordinated, where you've got a much better running back and a much better quarterback, of course, but you have a dynamic run game that punishes defenses, forces them to load the box up. And then you've got Russell Wilson dropping beautiful rainbow bombs for 60-yard scores on the regular. You have to punish teams so they can't play Russell Wilson in the conservative 2 deep shells that we've seen these past 2 seasons. And I think the Broncos have the horses to do just that.
We've seen the Broncos offense struggle since Peyton Manning retired. I mean, even in 2015, we really saw the offense kind of struggle in the passing game with Peyton. Peyton just wasn't who he was, but they had a run game with Ronnie Hillman, CJ Anderson. I think the run game takes that pressure off. And when you have a quarterback who has the ability that Russell Wilson does, not only just as a thrower, but also with his legs. I mean, if Denver stays fully healthy this season for the most part, it's, I think, naive to think that they won't take the next step offensively. And that's where we ask you, everybody in Broncos country who's tuning in and watching the Broncos Blitz here today on Mile High Sports YouTube page. Let us know what you think down below in the comment section. Please do us a favor. If you love this episode, Zach and I, we're going to be here every single day. We're going to attend practice. We're going to come back after practice, and we're going to break down what we saw. We're going to break down the storylines. We're going to recap the games on Mondays or Tuesdays if Denver plays a Monday night game, all here on the Mile High Sports YouTube page, milehighsports.com. I'm Cody Roark, Senior Broncos Analyst here, joined by Zach Segars, who also covers the Denver Broncos here from Mile High Sports. You can expect this every single day, Monday through Friday, here, Mile High Sports.